So here I have an old box grinder, and it is in such terrible shape. This piece isn't on. It's missing the little wooden knob, the lid for the hopper, and the drawer. It is in terrible shape. Even the label, you can barely see that it says Parker's on here. It's completely roached, but it was dirt cheap. And these 1-pound coffee mills are more expensive of the wooden ones. You usually find them for $70 to $90 in antique stores or higher than that. But this one, being in such terrible shape, was in such an excellent price. Now, my goal is to convert this into a lamp without really being invasive and ruining this coffee grinder even further. So in an effort to do so, I basically will have to try and run the wire through without ruining it even more. And fortunately, this particular one, if you can see, there is a hole in the bottom. So that is perfect for running the wire out and from underneath. So I picked out this style of lampshade over here. So as you can see, it will go like that, and hopefully it will look pretty nice and nifty. Now, one thing I like to do when I get old dirty antiques is to clean them up. And here I have a microfiber cloth where I put a little bit of moisture. So I'm not going to wipe down this part where the label is peeling, but I'm going to wipe this part just to clean it. And you get an idea of what the surface looks like to know if you should give it any coat of finish, which I don't think I will. I want to keep it a nice old rustic patina. But you are going to wipe down the coffee grinder and remove any vestige of dirt. Also, when you put it in your home as a display piece, you don't want to carry all of that into your home. Okay, so I wiped this down, and now you can see how the actual color of the grinder is showing. I'm basically going to have a pipe coming up from here to the lampshade, and I'm going to have it moved so it's still centered over the central axis of the grinding mechanism. And I plan to put a wooden knob here to replace the missing one, and when I do, I'm going to have this probably around here or there, so it's going to be designed where this won't be able to turn anymore. And I'm going to run the wire through the grinding mechanism. Now what I need to do is loosen this so that the actual mechanism, if the camera can actually see in here, which you may not be able to, but I need to drop it so there's a gap for the wires. Now, one issue I have with this grinder is this is rusted tight, and I'm not going to sit here with WD-40 and keep trying to mess with it, and that will grease it up and it will look ugly over time as this part collects dust and whatnot. So what I'm going to do is I have this wire. One secret when it comes to making lamps: save the electrical cords from old electronics that you get rid of. Anyway, what I'm going to do first is take this part and cut it. Now, this, I'm going to have to see and try to wedge this through the grinding mechanism without, if I can. This may be a little too thick, but we'll see. So I need to remove this. I don't want to cut the wires from here because that's a little extra length I can gain. So looking at this, you can see that the wire is not fused to it, so this is an attachment that can be cut off, and then I'll have the whole wire coming through. That's where a box cutter comes in handy. So I'm going to try not to cut the actual wire, so you may have to just keep trying repeatedly. And once you get it loose, it will come right out. Okay, so I finally got this out, and as you can see, it's unscathed. What I need to do next is run it through the hole, and I have to run it through the hole and then see if I can get it through the grinding mechanism, which I doubt I can, but all I can do is try. So since I could not get the grinding mechanism loosened to run the wire, I'm resorting to plan B, trying to unscrew this with that. Now, I don't want to scratch this to affect the patina, so I'm putting the cloth, and I used a really long one just for the leverage. So I'm hoping this will work. It worked. That's the problem. We need to get that loose, and that will cause this to drop. So once we get this to lower a little bit, we can tighten that bolt off once we have it low enough to run the wire through. And we can actually move this to where it's snug, and then this will stop moving. Okay, so what I'm doing next is I have this. So I'm going to clamp on it. Naturally, you put this on here, then you clamp it. And it looks like that did the trick. It dropped adequately. I don't know if you can see in there. Probably not. But now this thing has lowered, so you can run the cable through the center. So I finally have this through here. Now the next step is I have a rubber stopper that will go here. I need to drill a hole in the center. So I had to find a rubber stopper that is the right size. So I'll have to drill a hole in the center. And right here, if you notice, I have a 1/4 inch width copper. So I'm going to drill a 1/4 inch hole. This is going to be the pole that the wire is going to go through for it to support the lampshade and the light. Now, one thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to tighten this just yet to put this back on, because I want to first make sure I have enough slack depending on how much length of the cord I need. So that will be done after I come up with the mount. Okay, so here is the coffee grinder. I moved it down to the garage. And what I'm going to do is, for this knob over here, I have a nice wooden knob from some old blinds. And as you can see, this can go right here. And it looks perfect. And sometimes they were in different colors like white or red, so I might just leave this white and not paint it any other colors. Now, I do plan to put a few legs on it since the cable goes underneath the coffee grinder. And I have these I'm going to use as legs, and I'm going to paint these white to match this. So now I have one of these knobs, the small ones, to go inside the bigger knob, just so it looks better instead of a big hole. And as you can see, it cannot fit. So what I'm going to do is trim this down. I may use a box cutter and go with the grain, and that should easily get it to be nice and snug. And then we'll have to make sure there's a hole all the way through, just so that we can run the screw that's going to hold this up here. Okay, so I went ahead and sliced one area, so now I'm going to slice a little bit more. Okay, so now you can see it's in here and nice and tight. Okay, so what we need to do next is drill a hole through the rubber stopper so we can have the tube come up with the wire. And I bought some copper tubing. It's a little soft, so it's prone to bend, but hopefully for a lamp it should be fine. I also have a couple of these because it's going to come up from here, curve about this long, and go up so that the lampshade is perfectly centered over the central axis of the coffee grinder. Now also what I need to do is with this, here is a wider hole, and then here's a small hole, and this is actually 1/8 of an inch, so I'm going to actually drill a hole through here, so then I can run a screw that's that thick and have this mounted there. Now one thing to notice with the pipe is it's a 1/4-inch pipe, but this is a 1/4-inch bit. It is much thinner because the 1/4-inch bit fits in here. So I had to find a bit a little bit larger, and this is a 5/16" bit. It's not much tinier than the pipe, but it is a little bit smaller. And you do want it a little bit smaller so that when you run it through the stopper, it will be a nice tight fit. Okay, so I secured the rubber stopper in place. It's fairly level and centered, as you can see. So now I'm going to drill a hole through it. So here we have the bit I used, and you can see it's a nice tight fit. But the pipe is still too wide, so I need to use the next bit size over. So I have it in the drill, and I'm going to go ahead and drill it. So now this hole should be a little wider. Yeah, this bit goes in a lot easily. So now we're going to see if this is still a little bit difficult. But as you can see, we got it in. We bent this a little bit, so let me straighten this out. Like I said, copper is a little soft, but once it's in, it should look nice, especially as a rustic piece of copper. Okay, so now I have the copper pipe in here, and this side was bent a little bit, so I put it on the side that's not bent. Okay, so I put the lamp up, stood this about here, looked at the height, and I think here's a good place to cut it. I can always shorten it if I need to, or I can just push it further down. And I have about that much room inside the hopper, so it should be a good length. Lovely. And this has not bent much, and being shorter, it should be a little harder to bend. So now we're going to try and run it through, or run the wire through here. So now this is how it looks in here. So it's going to be a nice tight fit. Okay, so I went ahead and put one of these curved pieces. Now I need to have a little copper section here, and then make sure it's going to go in, and this piece is going to curve up to where it's centered with the axis. Okay, so I now have both of these because I wanted to make sure it's going to be lined up, and as you can see, to be with the center axis, I need to see how far the pipe goes in. So if I put my finger there, I can see it goes about that far. So I'm going to have it actually 3 times that length. So it's in that distance, and then the other piece like that, and that would be, as you can see, almost perfect. So that's what I'm going to do for the length of this. So now we have to cut a small little sliver of copper. Okay, so here's the piece I cut. It's a little hot. So now if I put these in here, there is the perfect gap. So now you can see it's lined up with the center, which is nice. And this is actually tilting, so if I put this with the center, it's just a hair on the short end, but close enough. It should make still for a really nice lamp. Okay, so here I have that piece with the wire coming out. So first I'm going to stick a wire in here, and this is going to be the tricky part. That is in there. Then I have to get this in here. Okay. Now I have this piece, and my worry is that this is too short, so now I need to get the light fixture and test it out. Okay, here we have a light fixture. Now this screws in here. You know, this comes out, that screw, that's the ground, and it screws in here. And we're going to have this part go in here, and as you can see, it's the right thickness, so we can wedge it in nice and tight. That will go in there. We may have to trim this. And we have the lamp coming up that way. So I pull this out, and I'm going to pull a little more slack, force this down. And this is the tricky part because you have to loosen what you've already done just to wedge this in. And now that may be okay. We'll try it. If it doesn't work, I can always lengthen it later or as I work on this. Okay, so now I'm going to stick this in here and see if it can be wedged in nice and tight. Okay, so I have this in here, and as you can see, I do have with this in all the way. It's now stuck, but what we need to do is put my thumb there, see how far this goes in. That far. So I'm going to have to go that far in, and right over here I'm going to have to trim this section, and I'll do that with the Dremel. Okay, so I cut this. It went in nicely. So then this piece will screw in here, and we will have, as you can see, a nice mount for the lamp. Ouch, this piece is sharp. What I'll have to do is pull this out. And then get that in there. And to make things easier, actually not that piece, but this piece, I'm going to pull this up so we have a little more slack to work with, and I'll push it back down. Okay, now I need to trim these and screw them in here. Okay, I have these shears, and what you do is you just go around the edge, and you can actually get a better job sometimes than you can, as long as you're careful not to cut the wire within. It's not as hard as it sounds, so you don't really need any special tool. You see? Right there, but I didn't get this long enough. Okay, so now I have these two pieces, and you can go ahead and twist them. So you're going to coil this and run it through here. And then when you tighten the screw, it should help tighten the coil. My hand's in the way of the camera. Okay, that should be fine because you have the insulator of the cardboard. Not the best job, but it's manageable, I hope. So then we get this one in there. And you see these grooves right here and here. Those grooves go right here. So that is how this slips on. And then now we can give this a little slack and force this in here until it snaps in place. Perfect. Now we can tighten the slack. So this is how the lampshade sits in here. And then we'll put the lamp, and now we get to make the switch. As you notice, this lamp socket doesn't have a switch on it. You'll see what we're going to do for the switch, and we're going to put the legs, and it's going to be nice and dandy. Okay, so now what we're going to do is run the drill through here, and hopefully just pierce that. So I'm going to set it on a piece of wood so this doesn't push against that and pop it out. And that takes care of this. Okay, so I have these that are going to make the legs for the table. And I was going to initially use one of these as a switch control on the drawer at the bottom of the grinder. And I was going to use a push button switch. But I realized if I get a switch like this that you turn, it will work better. But they come in black and I want it to be white to match these, so I'm going to paint this white. So this entire section will be covered by painter's tape. Okay, so I just spray painted these and I have the switch hanging down for it to dry, and I'm going to give it another coat. Okay, so this is the gray cord that I initially used, and you can see where I had it running up the neck and then through the grinder. And I realized that once I did that, there wasn't enough length on the cord, so I went ahead and bought a 13-foot long extension cord. And I'm actually going to cut this and make this into the cable for the lamp, but I'm not going to use the entire 13 feet. I'm going to give this about 3 feet or so to make myself a short extension cord. You know, I can put my own plug on the end and have a short extension cord and then use the rest of this, which will be long enough for a lamp. If I use the entire 13 feet, that would be overkill. Okay, so I cut 8 feet of the extension cord and I tied the knot over here, and I'm going to have another knot here. Let's see, another knot about here, so this part will go up the neck and this will be caught in there, and between this knot and here I will have this. So then when I have this piece of tubing in between, that will keep the grinding mechanism of the coffee grinder from actually grinding into the cord. Okay, so I ran the wire through and I have this cable. So there is a little bit of slack here, and I kind of want this cord on the other side of the grinding mechanism. So I have to turn it. Okay, and feed as much as I can through here. But I do want to leave a little slack because I'm going to run the switch over here once it's done. In the meantime, before I continue this process, I'm going to go ahead and measure the size of the drawer and get that stuff, the wood, cut. For the drawer, I'm going to use some 1/4-inch thick pine, and I will cut this to fit inside. Some models of coffee grinders had the drawer come flush with the outside, so it will close like that. Others will close like that inside. And that's how I want to design this. Okay, so I went ahead and cut 3 small pieces. This one I cut to be perfect to the drawer size. And these two, if I line them up, you will see that they're a little bit shorter. They're not exactly alike in length, but I'm not worried about that. I just wanted to make sure they're a little bit shorter than that, because this is the one that's going to make the drawer. And I'm going to have them aligned like this. Okay, so I just drilled a hole through the center, and as you can see, I had it coupled up with another piece of wood that's going to go behind it, so I drilled one hole for both pieces. And if you see, this hole may be a little bit small for the switch that's going to go through there, but I would rather it be small than too large where I'd have to start over, and you can see I already stained this piece too, and I want to make sure I don't have to go out and restain another piece. And what I did was I used a walnut stain because it was the darkest thing I could find, just because the coffee grinder is a dark piece of wood. So I'm going to go ahead and rig this piece up. I have the tubing set in here, and I went ahead and brought this thing all the way down. You can see the rust has rubbed off on this, but I'm not worried about that. But by taking this whole piece apart, you can see the bolts. I'll be able to make sure this is between the grinding mechanism and the power cord, so it doesn't grind through here and short it out. So now this is actually going to be here versus there, the way I'm going to have it. But I need to go ahead and splice this so I can run the lamp. But before I do that, I want to create a knot so when I have this cord through here, I can make it tight before I tuck it back down here. So I'm going to go ahead and, let's see, bring this lower. I can always try to adjust the knot if it's not too tight. And okay, it's good. So I'm going to go ahead and run this through. And it's a little tight. Okay, I just got it out. Okay. So now let me set it this way so it can be visible. Okay, so I have this piece of copper here that's going to go in here. So I have to get this to work. There we go. And because this cord is a power cord versus the other cord I was using, it's actually tighter through here, which is actually better, believe it or not. It may be a little harder to work per se, but it will actually make the job a little easier. So now I'm going to unscrew this and run this piece through. See, it will make sure this stuff is tighter versus loose. I may have to actually get some glue and get these to bond so they don't get loose later on. But it's actually a much better fit. Now if I have this in here, I do need a little more slack. So I need to run this through there. Perfect. Okay. So now I can go ahead and work on this part of the cord cable. As you can see, using shears works just as good as a wire cutter or a splicer, but it may be a little slower, but I feel like I have more control. The other ones, if you have the wrong size, they'll just cut through it if it's too tight. Of course, one can argue that you can accidentally cut this, but here if I twist as I pull, see, it's nice and twisted versus when I didn't twist. Anyway, now I can run these through there. Okay, so I had to unscrew this and use pliers to pull it through and then put this back on. And this screw that holds it in place, fell out, but I'm not worried about that. At least I can go further down if I need to. And I'm going ahead to get these wires screwed in place. Sometimes you can just curl it in there with a flathead and get a better contact. Now the other side. Ow! Don't want to poke yourself with the wire. Ouch. There's a piece on there that is poking me. But there we go. I can make sure these are tight. Okay. And then we can take this, line it up properly, and snap this in place. Okay. And now we need to go backwards to get this in place. So as you can see, it is a tight fit, but nevertheless, it's better that way in the long run. And then if this is trying to turn around, we can always adjust it. And once we have it adjusted right, we can put the screw in and tighten it. Okay. And I will have to glue this with an adhesive just so it can stay that way. But in the meantime, this knot is going to be moved further up this cord to there. Okay, so now I'm going to get this lid back on here, and I may have to eventually glue it. It looks like it may have been just sitting there and really tight the way it was manufactured, so I moved this up to where when I pull this up and tighten it, it's going to clamp on that tubing and not on the wire. So we need to play around until we get it back through there. Okay, now what I want to do is make sure this is tight because I don't want this turning, and I want to line it up about here just so it's towards the back. I just think it will look better. Now I have this cloth that I used to stain because I didn't want to bother with a brush. I'm going to take a piece, and this way I can tighten it without scratching the patina. Okay, that may be as far as it will go, but this is long enough that I can get this back on nice and tight. Okay, so that should do it. And now we have a little bit of slack here between this knot, and that is where I'm going to put the switch. I'm going to splice it in here. Okay, so now we're back to this piece here, and I went ahead and got a bolt that will go through here. So we'll get this in here, turn it as much as we can just to be tight, and then use the screwdriver. Okay, so here we have the switch after it's been painted. I could give it another coat, but if it's a little dark showing through to the black, it will be fine. Since this is rustic, that will help this mimic rusticness. So now I can go ahead and take this tape off. Okay, so I went ahead and widened the hole. I had to use the same drill bit I did after I tried to widen it initially and just work around the edges to get this to fit in, but I made sure it's still tight. And the gunk from my hands and the fact that this isn't fully dry yet made this a little dark, but that's fine. It will make it look a little older and creamy versus pale white to match more of the coffee grinder. So now this piece can go back here like that, and you want to make sure it's lined up perfectly because it's going to go inside and we're going to splice it with that. Okay, so I got these, they're called panel nails, but I call them threaded nails because if you see they have grooves on them, and I want to make sure this is butted up nicely. And then what I'll have to do is nail this in here like that. So here we go. Perfect. So then I can run this piece like that, which means I need to run a couple nails in there. So I'm going to drill a couple more pilot holes through this piece, and then I'll trim a couple more of these nails. Okay, so I went ahead and drilled a couple pilot holes. So now I can line this up, but before I do, I have a couple more of these nails I need to trim. And I want to make sure they're not going to go through this piece and ruin the facade. Going to make sure this is flush. Okay, good. Hold this down and nail. Okay, so looking at it, it's perfect. I can take this and stick it back in there. Awesome. So then we'll have this piece slide into the drawer. Okay, so I went ahead and drilled a hole. I put this in there, marked it with an awl, and drilled a hole. And that hole should line up right on the edge, make it really tight so this doesn't shift around. I'm going to use the same kind of bolt I used for the handle piece, and this hole is tight where I have to screw this in. I have a small washer that I got from a, when you take apart old electronics, you can save some of the screws and stuff if you need to. But then I put a bigger washer. This one is a tighter fit, so I'm just going to put that as a cap, and then this one just because of that head. One thing to note is this knot is going to keep it from coming out. Okay, so I went ahead and got these wire cutters, and I'm going to, I think I might give this a little more slack, just so I don't have to worry later. Awesome. And I'm going to go take this wire cutter and cut it right there. Then peel these off a little bit. Okay, so now this can go in, and we need to secure the drawer through that hole. So I have the two washers and that piece. Okay, so I went ahead and put the drawer up. Here I have this propped on an old crate. And I decided to get another washer too that's a little larger because it will be, if shifted, there'll still be room for that cord. Okay, so I decided that this is about the thickness of 2 bolts. So I'm going to use those to help this line up nice and level. So I'm actually just turning this in there. If I can get that in all the way. Okay, so when this goes in, it should be flush against the hole, and hopefully the thickness of the nut won't push this drawer in too far. Okay, so I got this in, and it's still low profile, so that's going to be good when I put the legs on. And let me move this. So as you can see, whoops, wrong way. I have the drawer, it's almost flush, and it turns nicely. So we got that switch part accomplished. So now while we have this propped here, we're going to go ahead and glue the legs on. Okay, so to glue the legs on, I decided to use just plain old Elmer's glue, and these are the pieces I spray painted. And this is the only part that's going to be more invasive than not. Okay, so I'll give this a moment to dry, and I may actually stand it up just so it puts pressure so this gets on a little tighter. I have my lampshade, which is going to go here, if I can get it in properly. This is the bulb I'm going to use. It is an LED light, a 60-watt equivalent, and it's rated for 98 milliamps, so I don't have to worry about it drawing too much power. Oh, I had it on to begin with. So now we have a working coffee grinder lamp. Let's test the switch. Awesome. And now we can take away this plastic and we're good to go. So this is a nice project you can do if you have an old coffee grinder, and as you can see, you can make a lamp out of it without actually ruining the coffee grinder itself even further.